Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Real Talk with Just for Girlfriends. We are back today for a very special show. Today, we're going to talk about lightening the load, caring for your mental health. And with us, we have Dr. Ericka Goodwin. So, we're going to have a great conversation. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, as everyone knows, and we have our lovely lead here, Miss Michelle Skinner. Let me turn it over to you so we can go through our normal process, Miss Skinner. Oh, wait, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. And we have a wonderful episode for you today, and it is right on time. We're going to discuss ways that you can lighten your load. You're carrying too much. We already know that. So we're here to help. But before we get into it, let's introduce ourselves. I'll go first. For those who this may be your first episode, my name is Michelle Skinner. I am a member of Just for Girlfriends and have been serving on the board a little over 4 years now. And I also manage Just for Girlfriends social media sites. So you will see our handles scrolling across the bottom of the screen. I encourage you to join us on social media for more discussions like this and other fun things that we have going on. Robin.
Hi, I am Robin Mcfarland, a board member of Just for Girlfriends. My claim to fame around here is I am the very first official member, and glad to be here. Looking forward to the topic today.
And
Yeah.
yes, good afternoon, everyone. I am the founder and CEO of Just for Girlfriends. For those who are new, Just for Girlfriends is our mission is to help women embrace self-care and self-preservation by providing unique and engaging activities, opportunities. We are a mighty sisterhood. We have over 150 members across the United States. We do live events in the Chicagoland area and live events in the DMV area. We have members and people asking us to come to Atlanta. So I see some Atlanta people on. We will soon be there live, but you can join virtually right now. So it's an amazing sisterhood. This sisterhood helps me lighten the load very often.
Absolutely. Yes, it does. And actually, before we get too much further into it, I want to say Happy Prince Day for all the Prince fans. I got on my purple.
Oh, I did not
Had to get my purple
know.
on. I had a purple head wrap, but my daughter, who's always in my stuff, had it. So I was like, okay, let me just get something that match. But yes, I am still missing Prince after all of these years. But today, we are so happy to have with us Dr. Erica Goodwin. She is a double board certified psychiatrist. She treats children as well as adults, so she is unique in that. She also hosts a wildly popular podcast called Better with Dr. Erica. So, welcome, Dr. Erica, to the show.
Welcome,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Erica.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited. I want to hang out with the girlfriends.
Oh, yeah,
Absolutely.
Come on down to
Please.
absolutely.
Atlanta. Hang out with us down here.
Yes,
We are
Absolutely.
coming.
we're
Yes, and you
coming.
will definitely be on the invite list. We love that. So to kick off our show, we've heard a lot in the news over the last couple of years coming out of this pandemic about, just caring for your mental health and mental illness. Can you start off, Dr. Erica, by first just telling us what is mental illness?
So, mental illness, simply put, is any type of struggle or challenge with mental health. So, a lot of times that's why you'll hear people talk about mental health because mental health itself isn't good or bad. Then they'll say mental illness, which is some type of struggle with mental health.
Okay, I understand that. I always wonder. So if someone is saying, you have some type of mental illness, it doesn't mean that you need to be committed. It could be something even more.
No,
Yeah,
commitment is down here.
that's severe.
You can't even see this hand. It's so far.
I'm
Is that
asking you.
the thing is what I think people are noticing is mental health challenges come in lots of different packages,
Mhm.
from kind of garden variety, just stress and overwhelm, to other things that people have specific diagnoses or names for, like depression, PTSD, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar, that kind of stuff. But just in general, we can look at people can just have some struggles, and sometimes they meet criteria for these diagnoses and sometimes they don't.
Okay, that is very helpful.
So I want to follow up on that, because you said sometimes it meets the criteria where you are, you have a diagnosis and you might need medication, and sometimes it doesn't. Can you talk about, can when does it become, is it a slippery slope where you're just deep in it and then suddenly you're over? How does this happen?
It happens a few different ways. I love how you put it. And I think this is the perfect time to talk about it, because if you talk to the average person, I don't know a single person that doesn't feel like they're somewhat on the struggle bus right now. That just generally is the overall feeling right now, is being on the struggle bus. And commonly, even to my corporate clients, we talk about issues with capacity. And at this point, people's capacity is so full that the average person doesn't have the ability to wear that mask and say everything is okay at work. So what ends up happening is it's kind of three different categories. One is you have enough biologic disposition, all this stuff happens, and you're most likely going to end up with a serious mental health disorder. The other situation is just kind of like when levels of stress or grief happen, which then cause challenges or things are tied to specific events. Okay. But one of the reasons I'm glad you're having me and we're having this conversation is there are ways to utilize a lot of mental health professionals before we get to crisis.
Okay. And you talk about crisis, and you said an event. So is it a traumatic event, an event that just was expanded your capacity to the point of no return, or like, how do you identify events?
Well, it literally can be anything from, for some people, the event was they became super overwhelmed and done when Breonna Taylor was killed or when George Floyd was killed. For some people, it could be divorce. It could be having issues at school. It can be having way too much to do at work. It could be the overwhelm people felt in the pandemic when a lot of women were forced to figure out how they were going to work and watch these kids and teach these kids and be the lunch lady while working.
It was hard. Yeah.
Is it always an event? Because there are times, and I was going to say, I'll speak from personal, and actually this was just last week for me. I don't know if I was just running around doing too much. I don't know if I was getting too, anticipating traveling, but I just suddenly had days where I was like, I just feel anxious. I just feel stressed and anxiety, and I don't know why. And there was no event, but I definitely felt it.
There's not always an event. And I think that's the thing, is sometimes, a lot of times you'll talk to people and they're like, I can't be depressed, nothing bad happened, or I can't be anxious, this trauma didn't happen. And the thing is your feelings are your feelings. Sometimes things are tied to an identifiable event. Sometimes they're not, or sometimes there can be something that's hidden in your subconscious. And that's one of the ways trauma tends to hide and show up, where you may not be able to put your finger on it, but there's something kind of pulling the strings in the background. So sometimes there's something identifiable, sometimes they're not. And then also right now, overwhelm is showing up for a lot of people, like anxiety. Like the Kaiser Family Foundation, they just did a ton of surveys in COVID. And it came back for US adults, 4 out of 10 were reporting anxiety and depressive symptoms during the pandemic. So a lot of this is multifactorial.
Yeah.
That definitely makes sense, though. Absolutely.
Yeah. How do we differentiate between, we're just having a bad day, or it's momentarily, to we really do need to seek professional help?
I'd say if I had to narrow it to one question, is can you function?
Okay.
So there are sometimes you feel kind of tired or down, but it's, it's real quick. The next day you're good. Or you can still do everything, but you still feel just a little tired. But it's more of, can you function? Can you get out of bed? Can you get dressed? Can you work? Can you get along with your family? Can you go to your day and not be crying in the closet, the bathroom, your car, the office bathroom if you're back in the office? So literally it's your level of functioning. And the other thing is, I'd say seek treatment earlier. For me, I recommend to me, if you actually said, Dr. Eric, what do you think? I think everybody should have somebody that they see for therapy. Right now, I know you all are great friends. It's wonderful. One of the difficult things for a lot of people is that if all the people you talk to usually are on the struggle bus, they may not be able to hold space for you the same way they would have had they not been on the struggle bus. So I'm a big fan of the mental health checkup. And sometimes someone comes in and you're like, actually, you're good. And then like you get a physical, or it's something where there's something subtle that can be done to support you, or just to have a space to hold space for you, and you use it for that way too.
Yeah, and I know during the pandemic, it was a lot of people were going to seek help and going to therapists, and sometimes it was challenging to even find a therapist, let's say. And so, are there other things such as I've seen apps out here, I've seen group therapy. I don't know. I think I've heard of people doing not teledoc, but virtual therapy as well. So for those areas, I know I was in one of those areas where it was just hard to find somebody. Like, what are some other things that you might suggest, or other ways to get to a therapist?
I am a huge fan of virtual right now. One of the
Okay.
reasons is everyone hasn't gone back to face to face. There are a lot of people I know that even still have brick and mortars that they're not seeing people in them.
Okay.
There are a few different reasons I think virtual can be excellent now. The one caveat I put is if someone's in crisis, a lot of times in person does a little bit better. And there's
Okay.
a certain level of illness if people are psychotic or they want to hurt themselves. That typically is a little bit better in person.
Okay.
But the upside about virtual is it looks like a lot of your people are probably busy professionals, is that it doesn't become a super interruption. I don't know how Chicago traffic is. I know Atlanta traffic.
Just as bad.
Same.
And you have to do scheduled gymnastics when you have to physically go places. So here it's kind of like, is it inside the perimeter, outside the perimeter? Where is it? Rush hour? Will there be spontaneous traffic at 10 o'clock on Tuesday? The upside with dealing with virtual solutions is you lose, number one, you don't have the capacity drain of figuring out, can I get there? It's literally, the great thing about virtual is you just need 5 minutes before to just kind of have a bio break, get something to drink, and sit down. Then you do your appointment, you hit leave, and you're done. So the upside about virtual is it fits in your day a lot easier. And also you may have accessibility to a wider variety of people because they don't have to all be as geographically close to you. I also go ahead.
No, that was going to be my question. I know psychiatrists, just like other professions, you have to be licensed in a certain state or whatever. But can you see people all over the country virtually?
I can because I'm licensed a lot of places.
Oh, okay.
What happened earlier in the pandemic is they did do some emergency concessions to allow people to practice places they weren't actually licensed. Physicians were kind of the first group that actually were pulled off of that, because even New York had a period of time where literally any mental health professional other than a psychiatrist, because we're physicians, could still see people in New York even if they weren't licensed. But right now, a lot of things have been pulled back. So we do have to be licensed, but a lot of us do hold multiple licenses,
I see.
so that we can still, like, I think I have 7 right now. So I can see people in 7 different states. And a lot of people are starting to have those kind of models so they can see people other places. But I also think group therapy can be a good solution too. It's just depending on the person, depends on what they're comfortable with being in groups. And how they process in that environment. It can also be really supportive for people. I think one of the places you hear it probably the most is when you talk about grief.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll also talk about sexual assault survivors groups.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think group is also a viable option. They do have all these apps. The good thing about the apps is they're very accessible.
Okay.
The only thing about the apps is there can be a variety of who's there. Kind of like Massage Envy.
Mm-hmm.
How you can go to Massage Envy and you might catch the best person on the planet. And then eventually you're going to look up and they're going to be at the Ritz or the Four Seasons,
Right.
And that's the only thing about some of those apps. You don't always have as much control. I know some people that have been satisfied with who they had, and sometimes it's just a little bit of a toss up. But now you can have similar accessibility in other forms.
Okay.
One thing that you said that I really, really like, and I've never heard it articulated like that, is just like you get a physical, because you always go get your annual physical,
Mhm.
but you don't think of just going to get an annual sit
Mm.
down with a therapist. I really like that. And I think that kind of will also take some of the stigma out where people feel uncomfortable or like they're not, if it's just something that you do, it's your mental health, just like your physical health. I like that. I like the way you articulated that.
Yeah,
Well,
I think
thank
we should
you.
normalize that because there is still, even though people talk about getting therapy more often, there's still a stigma or people fearing discrimination about needing therapy. Are there tools that you share with people on how to ask somebody or reach out to make them more comfortable to even seek help, before it's too late?
And
Well,
I'd add to your statement, I think that you even see that stigma more in the Black and brown community.
Oh, yes.
Well,
Ab-
what ends up happening is one of the things I tell people is if there's someone in your life that you're concerned about, that you may actually help them on that journey because it's, as you all know, it's not the easiest to always find us.
Yeah.
There are a
Yes.
few places you will find us definitely, but it is a little bit more complicated. So sometimes when people are having difficulties, just kind of helping them search or make phone calls, because it can just be overwhelming.
Mhm.
But I do think the other thing is starting to normalize these conversations. Like, there are times my friends and I and everybody's sitting up talking about when they saw their therapist. What's going on with your therapist? What's going on with my therapist? And I think the thing
Yeah.
is people typically think of it as far as crisis, but a lot of times they can hold space for you in times of growth, times of burnout, just
Mhm.
moving through this country in a Black body, especially the body of a Black woman, can be traumatic, along with the fact that most women have experienced either sexual harassment or sexual assault. So there are a lot of traumas that unfortunately in our community just were never treated, and they pop up in creative ways in the background. So I'm a really big fan
Yeah.
of having these spaces where someone literally, it's their job to hold space for you.
Sure. We
Yeah.
have one of our viewers who said that she's found that she internalizes her feelings and then they just burst out and have no control over when and how they happen, which is what you just were describing, actually.
It happens for so many people. And I think the other thing is there's so much. Like, you don't even know, you can't even keep up with everything going on in the world, let alone with people's personal lives right now. It's literally some of everything. As they say, it's all of the things, literally.
Right. One thing that we heard recently was I think I forget the woman's name, but the one who passed away, who committed suicide, and she on the outside was very strong.
Oh, Miss America.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. And it really, that hit home because
Mhm.
it oftentimes you have to put on this brave face and you have to go out there and you have to do all of this. And it is those strong friends and those strong people are seemingly strong that sometimes are suffering the most. The one image that I hate that they often use during Women's Month is the woman standing there with the cape, like she's Superwoman.
Mm.
That image just drives me nuts because it puts on this extra barrier and burden of a woman having to be the strong person and hold it all together all the time.
Yeah.
It's a setup.
It really is. I want
It
us to
is.
get away from using, the strong Black woman because it does make us feel less than when we need help or, when we have to talk to someone. It's like we are letting a whole community down if we can't just keep piling it on us and we can't stand
Right.
strong. So I really do want to get away from that. So we have another question from someone in our audience, and the whole issue around the vaccines caused some trauma for people. Some people can't take it, don't want to take it, and there was pressure on both
Yeah.
sides there. Have you seen that issue, and how do you get someone to come to grips with not being able to take the vaccine, but not being stressed out about that?
Well, I actually at one point had a significant amount of people coming to my practice due to anxiety around the vaccine. They were actually people that had either couldn't medically take it or decided they did not feel comfortable taking it. And just how everything is set up, especially once a lot of vaccine mandates came out, beyond just the stress of people just having different opinions of vaccines, but also just dealing with there are practical ramifications depending on how you work or what you do. If I had to say the handful of things to do is number one, to be educated on your decision, regardless if it is to take it, to not take it, if you can't take it or choose not to take it, being educated on ways to still keep yourself and your family safe. Because at the end of the day, a lot of these conversations are all surrounding safety. And also from the mental health standpoint, one of the things we haven't been talking about as much, there are certain types of mental health symptoms that we are seeing in people that have actually had COVID, such as increases in anxiety, depression, and also some cognitive issues. So as far as like being able to think clearly and quickly, that has also been showing up in people that have COVID. So I'd say number one is just be educated on what your options are, educated on how to stay safe, be able to have conversations with, especially like your primary care doctor. But if there's a reason you can't take it, whatever your specialist is that manages that, to figure out what's going to be the best way to mitigate risk. And the next is if it becomes anxiety provoking or difficult just to kind of manage moving through your everyday life or even managing work or familial relationships due to what your vaccine status is, it may be helpful to speak to a therapist to work through what may be underneath it or what are going to be some practical ways for you to feel like you can maintain your sanity even if your opinions are different than those around you.
And I'm sure that applies to a lot of different situations. We've had these presidential elections. I mean, we've seen a lot of combativeness, with friends. We've had to block a few people.
Boundary management.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of boundary management. And there are times where those conversations come up a lot around Thanksgiving and Christmas when everyone's talking about how to cope with the holidays. But we're also coming up on, we're in summer gather time, Memorial Day, 4th of July, all that stuff. And sometimes there may be points or conversations that just aren't going to be healthy either amongst friends or amongst family, and just have a conversation about how about we're just not going to talk about these right now and just enjoy each other's company in a way that feels safe.
Yeah.
I like that. We're just not going to talk about this right now. Right. Because it's going to lead to somewhere where everybody's upset.
Take away from the moment, right?
So
we're going to be in a chat and Michelle's going to tell us about 5 people she said she's not talking to something about.
I'm mentally making my list right now. I can't wait to get off of the show.
Boundary management.
With boundary management, I'm also a fan of sometimes there are people that they're text only. That when you have a conversation with them, they drain all of your energy. So I'm also a big fan of one of the ways to manage your mental health is you want to look at the equation of what's getting poured in and what's getting poured out. And you want to make sure that there's more coming in than going out.
That's text only. Yeah, there's a few people I can think of that fit in that category.
Michelle, I think you already have those people in that.
Right. Well, I'll know if she doesn't talk to me. Well, I'll know I got added, right?
You got added to text only.
I need to put that like in their contact information when it comes up. Text only.
Text only. Right. Yeah. Just in case.
I'm going down that rabbit hole. Exactly.
Yeah.
Bringing up just kind of circling back because you mentioned the anxiety with the vaccines and really more of when all the mandates got put in. And I think that continues. I mean, in fact, and I'll share, I don't mind sharing. We often share on this show. Just today, I had a little bit of and I'm fully vaxxed and boosted. My kids are vaxxed. However, my daughter's going to a camp and she's 12 and she's not boosted. She's vaxxed, but not boosted because it just happened. She just turned 12 last week and before you couldn't get it. And now they're requiring me to boost her. And I felt I had a little anxiety about that. And I was like, I don't know that I wanted to go get my pre-puberty child boosted, but for her to attend camp and I can't withhold her back, I've got to let her do it. Wow. So I think these things will continue to pop up. And I really valued your suggestion of kind of stopping and thinking through it and, going back to the science to get yourself back to where, you can keep going.
Yeah.
Well, you have to, and the information changes. So I think this is one of the things that became huge at this point was actually starting to have a relationship with the medical professionals on your team where you can actually have conversations and ask these questions, because one group of people that have been super stressed have been parents, especially of young children, because there's been this lag, especially the children under 5, where
Mhm.
it's like the whole family's vaccinated, but well, what do we do? We got
Right.
this little kid that can't be
Yeah.
vaccinated, and just along with all of the decisions you have to make as parents,
Yeah.
when it was, are they hybrid or they're not? Are they, do you have to
Right.
choose? Are they virtual or do they stay home? Well, they're going back. Am I sending my kid back? Are there mask mandates in school or they're not?
A lot.
It's just a lot.
Yeah.
I don't envy parents. I work with kids.
Uh, that,
But I mean, I think being a parent in this season has been traumatic before we even get to the fact that the school shooting in Uvalde.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like just
Mhm.
all of these different decision points, trying to keep your family safe, trying to still keep food on the table, be able to work and have income. I mean, it's been a lot on a lot of people's plate,
Yeah.
and it's been really overwhelming for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I was going to ask the question about the children. And so you do work with children. Are there different or new signs that you're seeing for their mental health? Signs that parents can look for? Just because I think kids are rambunctious and but things are new and different. And I think about my kids when they were younger. I don't know that I was even thinking about depression or overwhelmness and those sorts of things. So are there some things to help the parents out of the young kids to see some signs of mental illness?
I'm only going to tell you a couple because I want you to actually be able to remember what I said.
Okay, okay, all
Okay.
right.
Okay.
Number one, the biggest thing is you're looking for changes in your kids. You know your kids. You've been with them since they popped out of wherever they popped out from. They may
True.
have, they
We
could
know
have
those
popped
kids.
out of you.
Anyway,
You could
yeah,
have picked them up.
yeah,
There are lots of different ways this happens. But
Yeah.
you know your children, so you know when your child is acting different. So when their temperament changes, if they're staying a lot of time in their room, are they sleeping all the time? Are they irritable or lashing out when they don't typically do that? Or are they school avoiding or avoiding their
Mhm.
work, or do you notice that they're just crying all the time and they weren't kids that were really that emotional? So you're
mm,
that then the middle of it, you're just looking at change. And I realized one of the other things that's complicated is with school performance. I think before it was school performance was a little bit clearer, but these kids have gone through so much. From some of the kids did well virtually, some of them didn't. Some of them
yeah,
did well virtually, but going back to in person has been a struggle. So it's just looking at those changes, and then also having conversations with your kids on an age appropriate level. And if you have kids that don't like to talk about their feelings, eat with them, play games with them, or you can use TV, TikToks, or other things as kind of the mode or model to talk through things like, okay, what do you think about this movie? And you watch it together. Or, there's so much crap on TikTok and reels these days. Oh,
yeah,
what do you think about this? Let's watch this together. What you think about this reel? Because there's so much out there that you can use those as intermediates versus having, are you sad today?
yeah,
Oh, you're not? I don't know what to do next.
Right.
yeah,
I like
yeah,
And also TV and movies are just they have a little bit more feelings than when we were all younger.
yeah. They
Mhm.
do.
A lot more
They move
feelings.
you. Yes, they do.
They do.
Yeah.
And so, when do you know it's something more serious, that they're going through something, versus the normal puberty teenage years, of which they do all of those things?
If you want to know my simple answer is just as if your kid coughed a little bit and you felt like they coughed one time too many and you take them to the pediatrician anyway. I look at these things, or these are low barrier entries.
Okay.
Mhm.
If you have a suspicion or you're concerned, you can always get your kid checked out and somebody may say they're good.
That's true.
Mhm.
Or every once in a while, it's The kid is gifted, but they weren't tested for gifted, and they're bored and they're aggravated and irritable because they're at school bored out of their mind. It's just one of those things where it's almost like they say, if you see something, say something. If you see something that you're concerned about, I'd rather you have it checked out than to try to totally analyze it yourself. Because it just gets exhausting, especially, it's one thing if it's a couple of days. It's another thing if things just keep going and you can't seem to get your kiddo to kind of pop out of it. Because I know there's certain, especially with tween girls,
Yes.
they can be a little rough.
Yeah. And it's funny because I'm in a lot of parenting groups, and I saw a mother voice her frustrations in one of our chats about, her daughter just will not listen, comes and goes as she please. She's like too young to be doing that. And the mom was like, I just can't wait for her to turn 18 and she has to go, And I immediately thought about, I wonder if there's some kind of trauma. And we have a question from the audience asking about childhood trauma and how easy is it to dig deep and find out, okay, I do have childhood trauma I need to deal with.
Easy, or I don't know if I'd say it's easy. Well, because there are two ways childhood trauma shows up. One is you remember exactly what happened. The second is your mind built walls and you don't. One of the reasons I'm a huge fan of actually having trauma treated is one of the things that has caused such dysregulation and discord in our community is just this humongous amount of untreated trauma. And one of the things I see so often that's common with all of my patients with trauma is trauma robs people the ability to connect with others because it robs people of the ability to feel like people are safe or the world is safe.
Wow.
So to me, it's very important to actually have trauma legitimately treated because not only does it pop up in your own life, it really impacts the lens that you see the world through, which impacts then how you treat and raise your children.
That's what I thought. That's where I thought you would be going because
Yeah.
I mean,
we all gonna need your number by the end of this. You know this, right?
Yeah.
It's not easy, and I think there are numerous different types of trauma treatment modalities. I think the thing is to start addressing them and to recognize it. And part of the reason I say it's important to recognize it is, especially in the Black community, almost everyone has experienced some type of trauma.
Yeah.
You can go into adverse childhood experiences and they're more prevalent in the Black community, but also just the experience of living in a Black body and experiencing micro and macro aggressions is traumatic, along with just the other common definitions of trauma that people are really more aware of, like catastrophic accidents, assaults, rapes, bullying, that kind of, someone dying in front of you.
Right.
But a lot of that other soft stuff, everyone is traumatized. So it's hard to recognize there's trauma. Because if you sit in a room with 10 Black folks, especially our grandparents or great grandparents, if people really go into the details, horrible stuff happened to people.
Yeah.
And it gets normalized because it's everyone's shared experience.
Right.
Yeah.
So basically, I think if we sum it up, you really just need to talk. You don't know what may come out once you start talking to someone and delving into, why are you behaving or reacting a certain way.
I'm down with that, Michelle.
Yeah.
There's a little fee. That's why I always say, and that's what I love about all of our J4G sisters is when we're together, most people, one of the models that we say, Dr. Ericka, is we say, take off all your hats. So that's our thing, is leave all your hats at the door. And there have been many a times that we've been in a room, whether we were at a spa trip once and everyone was just talking and sharing. And the next thing you know, we were crying and had, similar, it was like a little group therapy session. Because yeah. So I think sharing can be very, very helpful.
Well, it's great because that also lets people know they're not alone.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That part. Yep. That was a huge one for me because, we're all busy. You can easily think I'm the only one that's dealing with this. So that part of that just for girlfriends and seeing, all these successful women and they're dealing with, have dealt with the same stuff, and
Yeah.
had some solutions I hadn't thought of. So you're right.
And Michelle, that goes back to the thing we were just talking about being the strong one, is that just
Yeah.
because you have this degree and that degree and you're in the C-suite and blah, 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 doesn't mean that you're not human and that you're not going through something like everybody else. And I think
Yeah.
people perceive you to be something else when you have titles and all the rest of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
And you guys alluded to or talked about earlier the strong Black woman, right? I think that's been so embedded. I mean, since I was
it
a
is.
kid, right? Just,
It is.
right, working harder, doing double the work, triple the work to get, right? Like all of that and holding it all together.
Mhm.
And I think the pandemic really, I know, showed me that, man, I need a break, right? I'm tired, right? I'm tired, and I probably need to deal with some other things. And I remember I had talked to these ladies, Dr. Erica, because I was in a situation where I was like, something's off. I don't know what it is. I'm anxious. Like I'm getting my work done. I'm not sleeping. I couldn't find a therapist. Let me tell you, they were packed. They were not accepting any new people, right? So I downloaded about 5 apps, was talking to my girlfriend, but I also started acupuncture and
Mm.
trying to kind of, they were saying that was supposed to help balance, and that certainly helped. I still needed to talk, but it was that moment that I said, man, I'm beat up. I'm really tired, and I still got to work from home. I don't even have little kids. I felt really bad for people with little kids. Like the
Right.
dogs were getting on my nerves. Like I just couldn't figure it out. But I hadn't felt that way before, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
I think I hadn't even had a chance to sit and process that. Oh, Robin, maybe something is wrong, right? Like, or
This is
right, maybe
different.
you do
Right.
need some help, right? Like
Mhm.
you need a little bit of help, and how do you get that? And I will tell you, I'm still struggling because that was the other thing I was looking for, somebody who understood women. And we had just gone through George Floyd. There were some things going on at work, lots of policies coming out around social media, people getting fired at work because of social media, all of these crazy things. So then I was like, I need to have my therapist needs to be a very safe space.
Mm.
And it was really hard to find people who, yeah, I don't want to say specialized, but understood or felt comfortable with women's issues and felt comfortable African American. So I was limited there.
Yes.
And then, yeah, it was just limiting. I'm going to try again. I'm going to go back out there and, I think there's probably more virtual than when I looked back before, but
Well,
it
maybe
was
maybe
tough.
Dr. Erica's taking more patients.
Well,
I am, but
I'm
I'm not
already.
currently licensed in the Illinois.
Not
Oh,
yet.
Not
Okay.
yet.
you,
But I
you
do have
licensed
a
in Arizona? You licensed
I
in
am
Arizona?
licensed in Arizona.
Well, there we go, Dr. Erica. I
I
will
do
be
have a
Yeah, she
emailing
has a
you.
double
resource.
residency. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a resource for y'all.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
One of my favorite places, because I do realize there's a lot of it's hard sometimes talking to folks and there's all this black stuff going on and trying to explain to people what it's like being black.
Yep.
Takes
Mhm.
a lot of energy. So there's a website called Therapy for Black Girls.
Okay.
And on Therapy for Black Girls, it's all everyone that lists there is black. So anybody can
Okay.
use the site, but everyone that's listed is black. And
Okay.
actually, I think almost everyone that lists on there is a black female. It's a
Okay.
site I recommend for people regardless of gender anyway, just because you can find black folks there. I will let folks know when everyone started getting full, the people that filled first, it wasn't high quality people filled, but also people that took insurance. So when it starts getting janky, it's a lot of times it ends up being easier to find someone that's cash only
Oh,
than takes
really?
insurance
Okay.
because the insurance one's filled faster. Because a
I
lot of people
gotcha.
are looking to use their insurance.
Yeah.
But therapy, it's literally Therapy for Black Girls. And to me, that's a site because you can always find it's all black women. It's every single, it's not stratified or one specific type of mental health professional. So it's some of everybody on there. There'll be some psychiatrists. We're probably least represented on there, but there are some of us on there. And then you'll have psychologists, licensed clinical social workers, counselors, marital and family therapists. Some of everybody tends to be on there. But it's the one site, it's probably the most comprehensive site that has Black mental health professionals that's out there right now.
Oh,
And
Let's
it
give
sounds
that
like
site
that.
out one more time. Let's give that site out one more time.
It's therapy for Black girls.
Okay, .com.
Mhm.
And it sounds like a good career for young people trying to figure out what they want to do. If they're interested in psychology and medicine, sounds like there's a void here.
We had a void before the pandemic. There was a huge workforce shortage that has become even just epically worse during the pandemic, because just the conversation we're having here, and a lot of your listeners out here, there are a lot of folks that all of a sudden are now having mental health challenges, that this is new.
Yeah.
This, or before it was something just really minor and manageable that, a glass of wine and a nap could fix.
And if it was real bad, you just took a shot.
And you're having these now people coming into treatment that weren't there before, and there weren't enough for just the people that were there to begin with.
That's true. I remember about 5 years ago, my father passed away, and I just was really overwhelmed with grief. And I remember I called around, and the common response I would get are you thinking about hurting yourself or someone else? And I say no, and they say, oh, we're full. Yeah. And then I'd be like, well, so that's the only way I was going to get seen?
Yeah.
And then it's helpful to know a few of us, because we can it gets a little rough sometimes, because I can't keep track of everyone that has contacted me asking me for somebody somewhere. I'm like, eventually, like, if you contacted me and I didn't tell you a person, contact me again, because it was too many to keep up with. But it's like, to me, there are 3 quick ways. It's therapy for Black girls. Psychology Today is probably the most complete listing of everybody, but the only way to tell people are Black is to look at the pictures, and we don't always. That's kind of hard.
Yeah.
The third, well, there's actually 5. Third is phone a friend, ask your friends. You'd be surprised how many people are seeing folks.
Mm-hmm.
Number 4 is ask your doctor. Number 5 is ask your insurance.
Oh,
okay. See, I started with number 5. I missed all 1 through 4 there.
I mean, think of it like finding a hairdresser, especially one that does natural hair. Who you ask when you're trying to find a hairdresser?
Your girlfriends. Yeah.
Very similar. Yeah, that's great.
So I was going to say, speaking of that, because I did want to touch on one thing, can mental health change over time? Because I have a couple of friends who are now getting close to menopause. Not me, because I'm a chicken tender, as I always tell them.
What is a chicken tender?
Chicken tender is me, young and chicken tenderish.
She's the youngest of our group, so
all right. I was like, I'm not familiar
with a bad right knee, Dr. Erica. With a bad right knee.
I'm like, are we looking at age like Chick-fil-A? Like,
no,
I guess I'm a chicken breast or something, and a chicken thigh over there. I don't know, but that means she's the youngest of the bunch.
Not by a lot of years, but I just tease them.
Just a few.
I've got friends who are nearing that menopause or perimenopause and say that it's really starting to create anxiety, and they've kind of gone and tried to get natural stuff. Can you speak to that? And what do we do with that?
Well, that's one of the reasons, one of the common questions I ask with people is kind of what's going on with your cycle. Do you still have a cycle? If you have a cycle, is it regular? Do you have any history of any issues with your cycle or feminine issues? Because what ends up happening and what everyone's seeing, and I'm sure all of y'all that have had talks with your girlfriends as you hit those 40s, is that these hormonal changes can cause changes in mood, changes in libido, changes in cognition, because sometimes people when they're perimenopausal or menopausal will also notice some brain fog. So it's one of the reasons it's good to be checked out by someone that's actually trained and qualified, but it's also one of the things that's important to be seeing your OBGYN, or if you have a family practice doc that does well women's, just to stay on top of what's going on in that end so that we can assess if that may be some of the primary issue or something else underneath it. But it is not uncommon that people experience some anxiety, sadness, irritability, mood changes, and as we said, libido or brain fog with perimenopause.
That's good to know.
Not to mention hot flashes aren't sexy, but I don't have them.
See, you with me, Dr. Eric. We chicken tenders. Just go with it.
I'm not a chicken.
She is not a chicken tender.
I'm not a chicken tender. I'm just lucky that somehow I'm not perimenopausal. No one knows when exactly we go into menopause, because I'll tell you a hilarious story that your audience may get a kick out of, is that a lot of the women in my family on my mother's side all had hysterectomies. So nobody, like a lot of times the time you go into menopause, it'll trend in a family. But nobody knows when they naturally go to menopause because all of them have hysterectomies.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Right.
So yeah.
That could be why I didn't know anything about it, because my mom had a hysterectomy. And
Well,
I'm like, somebody should have told me about this. This is terrible. Right.
And you'll see it in families because, you'll see a group of women in a family with, especially with the older treatments, with hysterectomies for endometriosis and for fibroids. So especially women that were our mothers and aunts, those were some of the primary treatments. They weren't doing as much embolization and some of the other things at that point.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, I remember actually asking my mom, like, how did I not hear about any of this? These symptoms are crazy. Like, you ain't say a word. She was like, I never had any. I'm like,
well, no history. You're the one bringing the history for the next bunch, right?
Oh yeah, my daughter hear about it on the daily.
Oh, that's better. At least you're not hearing about how my mom always reminds me I gave her hemorrhoids.
Oh no, that's terrible.
Oh yeah, she reminds
being
me.
Pregnant.
Oh boy,
we had long labor.
So, long labor.
It happens.
Oh my gosh.
Oh man.
We touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to ask about there have been a couple of situations in the media, really sad situations where people are in an active crisis, and you call 911 and it ends tragically. So I'm wondering what should we do differently, maybe before we call the police, or what should we tell 911 about the situation? Do you have any advice on how we can sort of eliminate, people in a mental health crisis being shot, by the police?
Well, one of the things that's going on is there's been some legislation that they're trying to get these national lines where instead of calling 911, if there's a mental health situation, you actually call another number. Like when I lived in Savannah, there actually was a totally different number we called.
Okay.
So you'd actually get mental health trained officers instead of people that are just going to come and shoot people.
Way. Right.
But one of the things there are a handful of things I say in crisis. One is, yes, you can call 911. Number two, if you can get someone in a car and take them to the ER, that's an option. Number three is most communities have a crisis access line. So for Georgia, ours is GCAL, the Georgia Crisis Access Line. But typically you can just literally Google your state and crisis line. And a lot of times they'll have one that is state run. The reason I actually like the state or your city or community ones is they typically know more about your actual community resources.
Okay.
And they can help. They basically will sometimes kind of phone triage to tell you kind of, is this a 911 situation? Is this we go to a psych hospital that does crisis situation, that does crisis assessments? Is this you stay home and let's make an appointment with you somewhere? So the thing I love with them is they can help kind of guide you in those situations when you're not sure what to do. The other resource for things like that is the suicide prevention line.
Okay.
But some of those can be used when you're not quite sure what to do. And they can advise you if 911 is going to be your best option.
That's amazing. I never heard of that. That sounds like that's a number we need right by poison control on our emergency.
It makes a huge difference because
Yeah.
a lot of times people don't realize there are a lot of, we call them levels of care in mental health.
Mhm.
So people kind of know hospital and go to the clinic.
Right.
There's
Okay.
all this stuff in between. So we call it inpatient is when you go to the hospital and you stay in the hospital. Then there's something underneath that's typically either partial hospitalization or intensive outpatient where you go daily and you do groups and have all this stuff, but you come home and you sleep at home.
Okay.
You know, and then there's some other kind of in between situations or resources. But a lot of times, if you haven't been in these systems, you're not going to be able to figure these resources out. And some of them are just a little janky because of COVID. So, like respites, there are some places that have, they call it CBATs, and some other things that just haven't been quite as accessible. And like IOPs and partials have been a little bit different because they've been virtual. They haven't all been in person. And some people have done well with virtual and some just struggle with it. But yes, I'm a big fan of crisis lines because sometimes it may be a situation where you may not need 911. There are times you need 911 and you just pray you get someone that ain't gonna shoot somebody with schizophrenia.
Right.
Yeah.
But there are times where you may not necessarily need 911, or someone is able to be calm enough to get in a car and you drive them to the ER yourselves. And because a lot of times when you call 911, most of those systems, it's not the ambulance doesn't come, the police and the ambulance.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
The police come, and it's just a different dynamic. And I know in our communities, there's just a lot of different complicated relationships that we have with law enforcement.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. And I think a lot of the issues are just knowledge, not knowing what or who to call for certain situations. So I find those that'd be very good information.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and when you have a loved one that's having one of those, seriously severe crisis, it's scary.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes you don't know if they're going to hurt themselves, if they're going to hurt you. And we're taught to just call 911. That's what we're taught. You have an emergency, call 911, not really thinking through what does that really mean for that person having that mental crisis.
And the other thing I'd say is if your option is 911, that's what your option is. If it goes sideways, that's not your fault. You did what you could do with the resources you had. Because the other thing is, that's why I recommend crisis lines, is because if you're not a mental health care professional trying to figure all of this out, I have 4 years of college, 4 years of med school, and 6 years of specialty training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not gonna get that from Google.
No, you're
No.
not. And these things are scary.
Yeah.
Assessing safety is very difficult.
Yeah.
That I don't want people to feel like they have to know every single thing when it comes to assessing it themselves, and naturally, sometimes your only resource is 911. You have to call.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a question that came up earlier, Dr. Erica, around are there trainings or educational books you'd recommend for counselors on counseling African Americans with trauma?
I'd say for counselors, and I think it just depends on kind of what level people are at. So I probably would need to get back to you on that. There are a few different resources I think that can be helpful, but as far as some specific for a counselor, that one gets a little bit tricky because when you say counseling, I'm not sure what you're actually looking, kind of is it based on information or specific therapeutic techniques. Now, there are a few trauma-specific techniques that are evidence-based, including CBT and EMDR.
Okay.
EMDR stands for eye movement, deprogramming, reprocessing.
Okay.
It's a whole lot of letters.
Yeah.
But I think some of those trauma specific trainings are really helpful to have some of those modalities in your actual tool belt, including another one that is also a lot of times helpful is internal family systems.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Our chat will be open. So if you want to come back and visit and answer questions, I know you're busy. So if you have time, or you can send them to me and I can share any information that you like to share. I would appreciate that. So we're almost out of time. But before we go, I wanted to know if you had any advice on how we can care for our mental health, how we can de-stress, like while we're at home, just if you're just feeling mildly anxious or like Robin said, you just know something isn't right. What are some go-to techniques that you would recommend?
I will give you a couple.
I appreciate that.
Okay.
One is put yourself into your schedule. So a lot of, especially for adults, we schedule our kids stuff, we schedule all of our work stuff. You need to schedule all of your self-care, from going to the grocery store so that you have healthy food to eat, to when you're going to exercise, to when you might have some alone time, to when you might meditate or pray, to when you're going to have some connection time with friends, and actually be intentional and put it in your calendar.
Okay.
The second is, don't be afraid of the pause. Sometimes you got to pause. You got to just push pause for a second to just be able to have enough time to have a conversation with yourself about what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Number 3 is, don't be afraid to take a break from social media, news websites, and the CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and all that stuff, because it ends up being overwhelming. 4 is to actually connect with people that love you. Sometimes you got to just phone a friend or phone a family member because you just need someone to tell you that they love you.
Oh, wow.
I love it.
Number 5 is ask for what you actually need. No one's a mind reader, especially in COVID. Partners and family members that may have been able to anticipate your needs may not be able to do that as well now. So, and 6 would be delegate. And bonus is 7. I was on a roll. I didn't mean to.
You're doing
I
great.
love it.
Tell them. Yeah.
I'm writing them down.
And 7 is to use a lot of these free resources out here. We mentioned I have a podcast, Better with Dr. Ericka. There are some other podcasts that are decent. They're not mine, but that can just help with dealing with kind of stress management, burnout, and just kind of figuring how to move through in this space that we're at. But a lot of it is about being kind to yourself and being intentional about not only holding space for yourself, but putting yourself in spaces where people hold space for you. And if you don't have places where people hold space for you or are feeling challenges, get a therapist. They are paid to hold space for you.
Right.
I like the holding space.
Yeah,
I
I like
really
that a
like
lot.
that. Yeah.
I really do. Oh my goodness. Thank you. Someone asked a question. I think we kind of touched on this. Does your mental health change over time? So they're asking specifically between 40s, 50s, 60s. Should they expect changes in their mental health?
Well, there are some reasons there may be changes. Partly, number 1 is hormonally. Number 2 is just aging itself, and how your body and your vessel is at 60 is very different than your 20-year-old body. The next thing is the times they noted 40s, 50s, and 60s are major developmental times where you're looking at identity, productivity, and legacy. And those can be, for a lot of people, stressful moments. But also, if you're hitting your 40s, 50s, and 60s, and like all of us when we were young, we thought we'd be retired by 50. And given how the market has been, between the financial markets itself and just a lot of the financial repercussions of COVID and all of the things, that people hit some of those milestones and they're hitting their 50s and 60s, and then also realizing they're not going to be able not only to retire, but they're just not having the life they dreamed. But also the other thing that happens in 40s, 50s, and 60s is, people divorce and spouses die. So it's a lot of this loss of these visions of how life was going to be. Some of it is just the pontification of where you're at. And some of it is just that if you get divorced, then, okay, this is how I pictured my life. This is what it is now. I've got to grieve what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
or my
Yeah.
spouse passed, because everyone doesn't live forever.
Yeah,
Right.
We all want to think we will, but we don't even know if we're gonna be here.
that's true.
True.
That's true.
True.
That's
My
true.
gosh, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. This was a great show, and I hope that we've helped our viewers sort of be more comfortable or sort of normalize seeking therapy, doing it early and often, sort of reduce that stigma. So please give this video a heart, share it with your loved ones. We have a lot of nuggets in here that can be helpful to a lot of people. Also, please follow Just for Girlfriends on social media. Visit us on the web. We are one of those resources, as Dr. Erica said. There's a lot of different paths to caring for your mental health, and Just for Girlfriends is one of those.
And Dr. Erica, how can we find you? How people can find you?
I'm pretty easy to find. You can find my podcast, Better with Dr. Erica, on all major podcast platforms, including Audible, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Just go to Better with Dr. Erica. You all will see my name up there. It's a little tricky. My parents used all the letters. So I have a C and a K. And then if you're interested in my mental health practice, you go to askdrgoodwin.com, AskDrGoodwin.com.
Great.
Awesome. This has been great.
Yeah, Real Talk for Just for Girlfriends will be back on the first Tuesday in July. That is July 5th. And we're going to discuss dealing with grief. We've touched on a little bit here. We're going to devote a whole episode on how you can effectively deal with your grief. I'll see you then. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.